All right, good evening, everybody. Again, thank you so much for coming out. I'm Jim Scanlon, the superintendent for the Westchester Area School District. Thank you for coming out and giving us some feedback on on what our schools may or may not look like come fall, with some of the social distancing, some of the mask things, and some of the regulations and guidelines that we're getting. Again, we will be, if you can mute your mics in your videos, Mary Beth and Michael and Chris will get you into the breakout rooms. We will be sure to get everybody into the breakout rooms for some discussion on the various topics. What I would like to do, and we will be recording this part when we go back to the breakout rooms. We won't be recording that section, but when we come back for the summaries, we'll be doing a recording so that we can place this up on the website. The presentation that I'm going to go through, outlining some of the challenges that lie before us, that will be posted on the website later tonight. We will be taking notes from all of our breakout rooms. Our facilitators will be doing that and summarizing some of the key topics, some of the key questions. As we get questions throughout the next 3 weeks, we will do our best to try to respond and answer the questions as they come in. As we work toward opening school on August 31st. So let me just bring up our agenda for tonight. I want to go over some rules for engagement when we get into the breakouts, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Go over the goal of our task force. I know that maybe some people had thought that we're going to do a straw poll and how we're going to open schools. That is not the goal. We need some feedback in 3 particular areas, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. The overview of the problem, some of the things that we have as Westchester is 12,000 students, public school students. We also provide services for some 5,000 private and parochial school students. We have to work with that group as well to try to get ready for the fall. The Pennsylvania Department of Education, I'll talk a little bit about some of the requirements and guidance that they've given us that just came out on June 19th. Some key research reports. We have a number of key reports up on our website. Maybe some of you have had a chance to take a look at some of the guidance and some of the reports out there. As new reports become available, we will continue to put those as a resource up on our website. I'll go through some survey data. Thank you very much for all of you who filled out our survey 3 weeks ago. We did survey parents, staff, and high school and middle school students. And I'll share some of the data that is in that survey. All of that data, I just have some partial points of it for tonight, but all of the survey data is available on our website for all of those groups if you want to take some time and look through all of that too. Focus on some of the essential questions for our task force members tonight. And then we'll go into our breakout sessions, and we'll schedule those to have some discussion and dialogue for 60 minutes tonight. And then we'll bring everybody back to the main room where we'll do a summary of the 5 groups that are meeting tonight for this parent group. We did have earlier this evening, we had some staff groups meeting. We had 6 of those groups. They met earlier. In fact, we were just finishing up with that group prior to getting on to this link here tonight. So again, thank you so much for coming out and helping us as we try to tackle a very, very complicated problem. In fact, there are some very big decisions that we have to make in a very, very tight timeline. And some people say, well, why are you waiting? Why didn't you get started on this earlier? I will tell you that since March, all of the superintendents in Chester County and in the month of June, a good number of the superintendents in the 4-county area have actually been working together to try to sift through guidelines and some of the expectations that have been coming through. We had some data that emerged late. There was a big group out in Harrisburg. That was the Pennsylvania Administrators Association, the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, the Pennsylvania Teachers Association, There were about 5 groups got together that put together a 138-page report that came out last week. The Department of Ed released its guidance on June 19th. We've only had that for 2 weeks. And that guidance was not very prescriptive in the guidance. And there, again, there's a link on our website for all of that. It says what school districts need to consider when opening schools in the fall. And it also says consider these things when it's feasible and reasonable. So we have to kind of pick and choose some of that. The Pennsylvania Health Department has said that you should follow the guidance of your county health departments. So we're working with the Chester County Department of Health. So some guidelines came out just last week from Chester County Department of Health. And they actually paired it up with their guidance compared to the PDE guidance there for the Department of Ed guidance. Again, all districts are in a similar situation, all 500 districts in Pennsylvania, and we're really working hard to collaborate. There's a lot of unknowns. Again, as we get more information each day. In fact, at 5:15 this afternoon, maybe some of you have seen this, the governor issued some new guidelines on mask wearing. And I haven't had time to even sift through that yet. We are waiting for some Department of Ed guidelines on what that might mean for schools next year. We looked at many things in the spring when we were in the red phase, and I'll talk about what the difference of the phases are for the schools in a minute. That is phasing that has been established by the governor of Pennsylvania, and the Department of Education has issued the guidance in those phases in terms of what schools can and can't do in terms of operating. But we looked at if we were if we were at social distancing for 6 feet, we did an exercise of going through and putting desks in rooms and how many desks can we fit. We can only fit about half of our students. Social distancing of 3 feet, we can get all of our kids in, but there are some mitigating things that we're going to need to do to make all of that happen as well. So we have been looking at, do you do some split schedules? Do we do a week on, week off, A-B kind of schedule? And it just seemed that there were so many questions that came up out of that, that our goal is to make an attempt to bring everybody in, not on split schedules, but to mitigate the spread of the virus and take some safety precautions in our health and safety plan that we're going to write and submit to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Our overarching goal for all of our task force members, between the staff and the parents, we have close to 400 people participating in this exercise and giving us some feedback. But we're going to need some help with the implementation of our proposed plan to give us feedback and try to be very, very specific on 3 areas that we really have to kind of tease out, because I think they're the 3 areas that are going to become the guiding principles for how we're going to operate. 1 is social distancing, 2 is wearing of masks, and 3 is taking temperatures and making sure that people aren't coming to school or coming into our buildings who may be sick. Here's our problem. That again, the guidance and considerations from the Department of Education, very, very nebulous in terms of what's feasible, when it's feasible, things we should consider. It does not specifically write out and prescribe some things that the district should do, but things that we should look at as we're going through this plan. The State Department of Ed or the State Department of Health, again, we've not gotten a lot of specific guidance. Now, the Pennsylvania Department of Health posted something last Thursday on its website, a report called Mathematica that was done by a regional educational lab that does have a lot of good data and statistics and does a whole analysis of social distancing. When do you see some results to help that? In that report, there is 3 feet is an area that you start to see some mitigation of the spread of the virus. 6 feet of social distancing is something that we looked at. Again, we can't get all the kids in the schools, and that requires some split schedules, and it becomes problematic for parents and staff who have young children to try to find daycare every other day. Of course, daycares are struggling to get open as well with regard to some of the guidelines that they have also. I know that our business community, because we work very closely with 3 different chambers of commerce in Chester County, and they are very concerned about their ability to open and operate in the fall if schools are not going to be able to open and operate. So there's a lot of people watching, and it's not only just Chester County, but across the entire state in terms of the businesses and how are they going to be able to operate if in fact our schools are not operating. Our ultimate task is, and our goal is, to open school for all students. And again, we want to have some plans to mitigate the spread of the virus, which is where we need your help to help us identify things that we're going to need to address. The Pennsylvania Department of Education has issued this guidance in terms of the documents that we've gotten from them. The red phase, the yellow phase, and green phase. Red is there's mandatory closures for schools. We were in that red phase during the spring. That requires remote learning that has to take place. We have been working with our staff, and will continue to work with our staff to make improvements to the model that we put together in a 48-hour period in the spring. So we've taken survey data, we've looked at student data, we've looked at parent concerns and staff concerns, and we are working, if in fact we go back to a red phase sometime next year. There's concern that people say that the flu season could spike again sometime after Thanksgiving, and we have to prepare for that. So just to let you know that we are preparing for that. The yellow phase, schools are allowed to open. There's got to be some social distancing, some other safety measures. The maximum number of groups that can meet are 25. We have been in that yellow phase for several weeks in Chester County. So we are actually going through the exercise of looking at our classroom space and classes, and can we move classes around if in fact we have to operate in the yellow phase to find some additional space. That may require at our elementary schools where it is crowded, as many of you may know, we are building an 11th elementary school, but that won't be open in the fall of 20. That'll be open the following year. So that if we need some additional space, that may require things like music and art coming into the classrooms and using some of those spaces for classroom space if in fact we're in that yellow phase. The green phase, schools can open. Again, with some social distancing, the maximum groups are 250. This is the biggest difference between green and yellow, at least for the guidance for schools. And with the green phase, that's what we're gonna try to plan for. We are doing some administrative work on that yellow phase, but the green phase gives us the opportunity to look at some larger group areas. Things like cafeteria are easier in the green phase than in yellow. Cafeteria, for example, we can get 250 kids in a cafeteria as long as we can social distance of 3 feet or more. In yellow, we would have to probably be serving lunches in our classrooms. I mean, those kinds of things become very different and difficult for us to do. But it is possible, and we can do it. These are some of the reports. These are all on our website under our reopening of schools link, and that is right on the upper right-hand corner of our main webpage. The CDC guidelines, they came out in May. We have been following them, and we are following CDC guidelines and Chester County Department of Health guidelines for cleaning in our schools. We're also following the guidelines for contact tracing that are put out by the Chester County Department of Health. They do not recommend, if there is a case, in closing schools if there is just one case in a school, but to mitigate it, disinfect areas, and then come back and use those areas after a 24-hour period. The Chester County Department of Health, which again is what the state has told us to follow our Department of Health, guidelines. There are only 6 of the 67 counties with a Department of Health. So we're very fortunate in Chester County that we do have a really good Department of Health that works with schools and works with daycares, works with businesses in Chester County. That guidance came out on June 23rd. That is a really nice document. All of us administratively have been through that. It outlines the recommendations that the Department of Health makes, and it compares it side by side with the considerations when feasible that the Pennsylvania Department of Ed has given us as well. The Mathematica report that just came out last week, again, that can be found at the state Pennsylvania Department of Health, Pennsylvania Department of Ed, and we too have that on our website, which has done a worldwide analysis of when schools have opened around the world. What are some things that worked and some things that didn't work, and where did they see some mitigation in terms of social distancing and masks in particular. We know as superintendents, I will tell you that many of our parents and staff, they may live in another district, work here. There's a lot of crossover with the counties, a lot of crossover with the districts. If there are too many different plans with all of these school districts, that creates problems. So if we have teachers who have kids in the Avon Grove School District or the Unionville, the Chasford School District, and they're on a different schedule than Westchester, that creates some daycare problems for our staff. So we all recognize that. We are working closely together to try to make our plans as similar as possible in terms of days that kids are in school. Now, there's always some differences in the calendars, which doesn't, I mean, we don't avoid that every year with some of the different lengths of breaks, but for the most part, we are working together as Chester County superintendents. We have been meeting since the shutdown twice a week since March, and we continue to have weekly meetings throughout the summer, and really now all focusing on how we're going to get schools reopened. Chester County districts also have coordinated with other groups in other counties, Bucks, Delaware, Chester, and Montgomery counties. So there are about 60 different superintendents working together to try to look at a regional plan that bringing kids back. So we're trying to be as similar as we can with regard to our plans in terms of when kids are in school. So let's take a look at some of the points of our survey data. And again, all of the different data points for our survey is up on our website. We had about 3,500 parent responses. This was the first part of that survey was about the remote learning we did back starting in March. And we asked some questions about live, real-time, synchronous instruction. And was it sufficient for your children to meet those academic needs? This is the overall total district data that I'm sharing. We do have it broken down by middle, elementary, and high school as well. But 21% strongly agree, thought that, yeah, it met the needs. 30% agreed. So there were about half the people felt like, yeah, we were meeting the needs there with the synchronous instruction. Was it stressful for children? We had about 49% feel like it was stressful for the kids. I know that particularly at the elementary classrooms, when we had to flip the switch and go from the face-to-face instruction in a matter of 2 days to online, that our teachers ended up being tech support people for the first 2 weeks of that. We did try to make some adjustments and changes as we went through there, but that was stressful. Just trying to get onto Schoology or Seesaw, whichever platform we were using, depending on the age level of your child. The mental health question we asked, were parents concerned about after a period of isolation from friends in school? There was about 50% of our parents felt like, yeah, this isolation from friends in school was really difficult, and they're concerned about mental health. Our teachers have very similar concerns about that, and I'll share some of that teacher data in just a minute. So the next set of questions was, okay, let's look at opening school. Let's look at what August 31st is going to look like. And how would you feel about sending your child back to school if there's still no vaccine or some effective treatment for COVID-19 virus? And you can see that these bars are elementary, middle, high school. This was the number one response to this question, that I'd be willing to send my child if some precautionary measures are in place. Some aren't sure, and I can imagine that parents aren't quite sure. I am a parent in this district. I have a middle school and an elementary school child. So I too want to make sure we have as much in place for precautionary measures as we have to decide whether we're sending our children back into school. Some aren't sure. The other question we asked, would you prefer the homeschool or do a cyber program, which we are putting together a cyber option for parents who may not want to send their children back to school. And I'll talk about some timelines on that. So a large majority of our parents, based on the survey data, really want us to find some way to bring the kids back to school, but do some of these ways to mitigate the spread of the virus. We asked about masks because when you look at all the different guidelines, again, some of the areas that are areas that we need to try to help mitigate, we need to get some feedback from our staff and our parents about this, is wearing a mask. And would you be comfortable if we had your children wear a mask in school? And this is broken down by elementary, middle, and high school. And the elementary parents, a little less than half said, yeah, they would. 62% of middle and 68% of high school. So the older the student, the more comfortable parents seem to be with having their children wear masks in school. If we have to reduce number of students on a school bus, now transportation creates its own set of concerns, and that's why we have a committee looking at some of the transportation things to address. We have 3 in a seat in many of our elementary bus runs. The guidance from the Chester County Department of Health and also Bucks County Department of Health has some very prescriptive guidance for Bucks County schools that you can have 2 to a seat in buses. Yet there's other guidance that says you've got to get at least 3 feet of social distancing to mitigate about 80% of the spread of germs. You can't, in 2 in a seat on a bus, get 3 feet. Yet the guideline says it's okay to have 2 to a seat on a bus. We got to tease out that a little bit. But if we required, if we had to reduce the bus loads, because we just don't have the finances to go out and buy another 60 or 70 buses, we couldn't even have them if we ordered them 5 weeks ago. We wouldn't have them because there's just not buses sitting around to come in. So would you be willing to transport your children? Between 65 and 75%, depending on the middle level, said, yeah, we could help reduce the bus loads. We could transport the kids. They could get rides. Some of these are probably high school kids with driving to school. But it does create a problem. We can solve one problem with bus capacities. It creates a problem for drop-offs, which means we may have to do things like assigning some times, windows of times for people to drop off so that we can get the kids in safely and not have to have big log jams out into some of the roads on some of our schools. So again, each time we answer a question, it does create some other questions that we need to address. We asked about, are you willing to have your child wear a mask on the school bus? And 75 to 85% of the parents said yes. It's not wearing it all day long, but on the bus ride, that may be 10 to 20 to 25 minutes. And again, if we can reduce the bus loads where we can get enough distance with the kids, they may not have to do that. We asked about the body temperatures. Again, this is something that as we all have to really do our part and make sure that our kids aren't sick when we send them to school. Same with our staff, and this is something that we've got to do with our staff as well. We don't want people to come to school if they're sick. We want people to be doing some self-monitoring. So we asked a couple questions here. Would you sign an agreement that you agree to take your child's temperature before coming to school and not sending them if they're sick? It's something that really prevention starts before we even get the kids on those school buses and get them into school. Or would you permit us to take the temperature upon entering school? So that was about split. But it looks like either one of those, 98% of the parents said, yeah, I'll agree to do that, or you can go ahead and take a temperature as the kids come in. Sports and extracurricular activities, and that group actually was meeting at 5:30, and we have some parents on that group as well. Should we try to bring sports in? 75% of the parent survey thought we should try to do some of that. We are waiting for guidelines from the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, the PIAA, which actually governs the sports and the sports schedules in the state of Pennsylvania. The PIAA is not governed by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. I find that to be somewhat interesting, that the Department of Ed doesn't have a lot of say in what happens with the sports programs out there. Now, we did get some guidance from the Chester County Department of Health about fall sports, so that is helpful. We just received that this week. So that committee is looking through some of that guidance. We also did get guidance on summer workouts for kids in the fall. Our board did pass a health and safety plan for that. Those are primarily just one-on-one workouts. We can absolutely social distance there, and it is outside workouts only. So it's very specific, very safe, but just to try to help kids do some workouts and stay in shape. So they actually start on Monday, and the board did approve that plan at the June board meeting. Should we provide online learning this coming school year for all students? If we have to do that, how do you feel about synchronous, the real live instruction versus asynchronous? Majority of parents said that they would like to see more synchronous learning that was given during the spring, about 61%, and about 23% said that we should have about the same. So this piece of data tells us that we want to do some more synchronous instruction if we in fact have to go to a red phase and close down our schools again. And again, we're working with our staff to address some of that. So what do the staff say about some of these things? It was really difficult to balance their work commitments and the reality of a family. That's not any different than parents. Parents had to work and try to help their students with logging in, particularly at the elementary levels, trying to keep the middle school kids focused, trying to get the high school kids up on time to get logged in. So it was a lot of stress for our parents, and also it was difficult balance for our teachers as well. Academic learning loss, again, our staff they're concerned about it. There's 26% are concerned, about a quarter of them strongly agree, and about another half agree that this is something that we're working with our staff to try to address as we come back, find out where our kids are, where the slide was, and how we're going to address that slide. Pandemic remote learning, again, was it stressful? We had, again, 18% of our staff said they were strongly agree, 33% agreed to that. So a good majority of them felt that it was a stressful way to teach. And again, it's not how we were designed. It's not how we're set up. Frankly, it is not the best way for people, for us to teach or for kids to learn. So then we asked staff, again, same categories about reopening. How would you feel? Are you concerned about your ability to be effective with social distancing or wearing masks? Here's 42% strongly agree, because they're going to have to monitor some of this, keeping kids apart, wearing masks. We have, we had some discussion with our staff already about kids that are deaf. They need to be able to read lips, and how do we do that? So when we talk about masks, we've actually looked at face shields. So when we use the word mask in these next 3 weeks, we're also talking about face shields as well as maybe a way to try to mitigate some of that spread of germs and still be able to see lips and facial expressions, things like that. And that's how we're going to try to address at least some of that. But some concern about how are they going to be effective if they've got to monitor social distancing and also wear a mask. Personal health. This is some of our staff. We have some staff that are a little bit older and may have some concerns, or some staff that may have some compromised immune system based on whatever some of the illnesses they might have had, or some sicknesses they might have had. So about half, a little more than half of the staff have some concerns. So we also want to try to mitigate spread of germs, not only for the kids, but for the staff who are going to be teaching them. We got this from our staff who are parents, and this goes back to the whole coordinating of efforts of all the districts. Yeah, as a parent of a school-age child, I'm concerned about the fact that our district and other district where I live may have different models for the opening in the fall. 56% strongly agree with that. They're concerned about that. Another quarter agree. So we got about 3/4 of our staff that have some concern. This kind of data is very similar data being heard in all the surrounding districts, which is why the superintendents are trying to work collaboratively and together to try to mitigate some of that and make our schedules as similar and close, at least in terms of kids being in school on the same days as we can. Our high school students, we had over 1,000 high school kids, which I thought was a pretty good response rate for high school. It's about a third of the kids, given the fact that they were already gone and out of school when we sent out the survey. So maybe they don't have anything to do at home, and they felt like, oh, I'll help the superintendent and fill out some survey results. But nonetheless, a very good response from high school kids. Would you prefer? We asked them. We're trying to get a handle on how many kids might want to enroll in an online program. Only 13% of our high school kids said they would prefer to enroll in an online program in the fall. Now that may change when they see what the parameters are going to be. But what it does tell us is that high school kids, and for those of you who have high school kids, and I got a whole neighborhood in where I live with some high school kids. Like, it is hard for them not to to be social distancing, and it's very difficult for them to only be communicating over something they really love, their phone. They do like to get together, and in the summer we're actually starting to see some kids get together, and we're starting to see some cases in Chester County of teenage kids who are becoming sick with COVID-19. They want to come back. They don't want to be isolated anymore. That's what that tells me with some of the high school students. Middle school, high school, again, about wearing masks. Should teachers wear a mask at all times? 19% strongly agreed, 19% agreed to that. So they're not a large majority who think that we should do that. But again, that was taken 3 weeks ago. For the start of school, should students and teachers only wear masks between class periods? Is a question that we ask them, or whenever they're in the hallways. These are big challenge areas for us for social distancing. At the elementary level, most of the classes move individually by a class. Teachers can control that social distancing area. But at the high school and middle schools, changing of the class, changing of the guard, it's crowded in those hallways, and that may be a place where we're going to require wearing masks because we're just not going to be able to social distance or monitor that even if we could. So we had about 14% agreed, 27% or strongly agreed, 27% agreed. So a little bit more affirmative with that particular question. Rather than wearing masks all the time. Middle school students, not as many kids responded to that one, only 383, but this is the data that we have from middle school students. Would you prefer to enroll in an online cyber program? Again, only 16% here said they would, at least when they took that survey, 16% of the kids who took the survey. And for the start of school, Should teachers and students wear masks at all times? They're a little more okay with that than the high school kids. If you remember, high school kids wasn't very big, but here's about 50% of the kids said, yeah, that's probably a good idea to do. We agree with that. And how about changing in the hallways? They went a little lower on this one. 12% strongly agreed, 22% agreed that that we should only wear them in the hallways. So there's some student data for us anyhow to kind of look at. So let me talk briefly about our overarching questions for all of our task force committees. We have 11 different subcommittees meeting, and we'll break out here in just a couple of minutes to get in for some discussion. But we're looking for these ideas that are reasonable or feasible expectations in 3 areas: wearing masks, social distancing, taking temperatures. There are some prescriptive things that we're going to do with the Department of Health. There are cleaning regulations from CDC that we already have in place for the summer. Our 12-month people have been in for 3 weeks now. Excuse me. And so I think we're pretty clear with some of those expectations. But these are the 3 areas, the problem areas, where we want to get some feedback from our staff and from parents in these areas about what can be reasonable and feasible. And as we do this, we gotta keep in mind, how do we best help our students with these changes as the overarching questions. Are essential, some specific to some of the subcommittees. Again, the athletics and after school group met at 5:30 tonight. They're looking at some guidelines and what activities can you run or not run in the fall. You know, we may be able to run some sports in the fall if we can meet some social distancing guidelines. Sports like maybe golf, maybe tennis, maybe cross country, maybe some others. I don't know. I don't know how we run some of the other contact sports if we're going to have to maintain 3 feet of social distancing. So they're working on that. We don't have any guidelines from the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, the PIAA, not yet. As I said, this week we did get guidelines for fall sports from our Chester County Department of Health. So we are starting to work and tease out with those guidelines. Transportation Committee, and that group is meeting tonight as part of this session. Some things about bus drivers. Our buses, we don't own our buses in Westchester. We contract those with Crafts and On the Go Kids. So we have to work closely with them on bus driver responsibilities. Whether we want masks on the school buses, what times do we want masks? How do we get that, the whole social distancing piece? How do we get information out to parents about whether or not you'd be willing to drive your children to school? In fact, we actually have to start that process before we finish a process with our school board on July 27th, because it's going to take us some time to develop bus schedules. And if we wait until the second week of August, we're just not going to have time to get all the bus schedules. So we're planning to send out some preliminary information to parents about whether or not they can transport their children to find out what the capacities will be on those buses as we start to develop those bus schedules, and then regulations for wearing masks and social distancing. So that group will be focused on some specific pieces for the buses. Our staff and our parent committees, looking at the recess, the lunches. These are some of the big areas, changing classes, some of those big areas where it's going to be hard for social distancing. And then, what are some of the social emotional things we need to address? I know in our staff committees, they were focusing a lot on some ways they can try to make kids feel more at ease with some of these new regulations that we may have as we open up school. All the staff committees, again, they're looking at staff safety, wearing masks for staff. So they're doing some of that, what's reasonable. In our staff special area committee, looking at specials. How are we going to run music classes? How are we going to run art classes? How do we do physical education classes, library? So they're looking at some of that. And when we use those large areas, our facilities department has put a disinfecting schedule in place to try to make sure that we're cleaning areas that are used for large group areas as often and regularly as possible. So our breakout sessions for tonight with our parents groups, it's elementary, middle, high school, and pupil services, as well as transportation. So Chris and Mary Beth and Michael have been trying to get you guys all in the right rooms. We're going to get you to those rooms in just a minute. If you are not assigned to a room, hang in there on the main room, and we'll get you to one. We just may take a couple of minutes, but we'll get everybody into one of those 5 breakout rooms. When we get in there, our focus for tonight, essential topics. Our topic is social distancing. So our facilitators will try to keep you on point and on target. So we want to talk about the guidance, a minimum of 3 feet as social distancing. Anywhere we can get 6 feet, that would be great. But a minimum of 3 feet does get us some mitigation in terms of spread of COVID-19. And we want to look at the start of the day until the end of the day, and where do we see some of these potholes with social distancing. We might not have all the answers. Certainly we won't have all the answers. But as we generate the questions, we will try to get some responses and some guidance and guidelines on questions as they come up from each of the subcommittees. We got to look at where are the challenges at each level. Now, elementary is going to look a little bit different than high school, and we really need the parents' lens and perspective on that. Where are these challenges going to be regarding social distancing tonight? And what can we do to make it easier for our students? Is another topic, as an essential focus topic and question for tonight with regard to the social distancing that takes place. Next week when we get together, we will talk about temperature taking and wearing of masks. Maybe we will have a little bit more guidance on that, since the governor announced some new regulations on wearing masks as of 5 o'clock this afternoon. Again, I haven't looked through those regulations yet, but we have an administrative team tomorrow that will be. They don't know this yet, but that'll be one of our topics now that's new guidance that's come out from the governor's office. But again, what are reasonable and what are some considerations for implementing guidance for temperature taking and wearing of masks? Then when we get together on the 15th, we want to try to tease out some considerations to implement this plan. What information will our staff implementation teams need? They're going to continue to meet after the 15th through 3 weeks in August up to almost the beginning of the school year, because we're going to have to operationalize all of that, and it's going to fall heavily on our administrative team and our teachers and our sports staff in our schools to make it all happen. So those implementation teams will continue to meet after July 15th. And what is some information that we might want to provide to them for things that we're going to need to know and address as many of the concerns and questions that come up. And ultimately, how do we best help students with these changes? Try to have some final thoughts from discussion on July 15th with our groups. Some rules for engagement as we get into the breakout rooms on Zoom, and I'm sure many of you have been on Zoom. It's not as easy to operate, especially a big group like this, more than 200 people in sessions. It's hard to do some breakouts. Next week we're actually gonna do some smaller breakouts. We're gonna take the subcommittees and try to divide them into 2 smaller groups so that there'll be even smaller subcommittees next week. And we will pre-assign as many people to them as possible so that we can get you right into them after we meet briefly on July 7th to start our meeting next week. But staying engaged, we don't have baseball right now, but I use a little baseball acronym. Stay on base. So please stay on base. Be respectful of each other's comments. There's going to be times where people will say things we won't agree. You may have a strong opinion one way or another. We got to be respectful. This is a very challenging time, and we're trying to work through this as best we can. And we want to maintain respect for each other's comments. Allow airtime for as many people as possible. We have a lot of people on these committees. We had many more who wanted to be part of it. We just couldn't facilitate the large groups of people that wanted to be on it, but we want to hear as many people as possible over these next 3 weeks. So please don't dominate a group discussion, and please yield time for as many people to provide some input as possible. Stay focused and on task. Our facilitators will do that. Don't get mad at them if they're trying to keep you on task and bringing you back to the focused topic for tonight, which is social distancing. And we'll get to some of those other topics, the temperature taking and mask taking next week. So we want to stay focused. Something that we have learned to do very well the last 4 months. Expect some non-closure. Again, we're not going to have answers to the questions that may come up. And if you think of some after tonight, please email those to your facilitator in your group, and we will provide responses in some follow-up communication task force members. We will come back after the breakouts. We're going to be 60 minutes in those breakouts to have some discussion on social distancing, and then we'll ask each of the facilitators to do a brief summary from each of the groups to hear some of the ideas that were discussed. We also have a note taker in each of the breakout sessions, and they will be doing a summary for us. I will post on our website summary of the topics, summary of the questions, and summary of some of the solutions that we come up with by each of the 11 subcommittees. And we will continue to post that on our website for all people in our community to see some of the work that we're doing. We also have a reopening at WCASD.net. That can be found on our website as well. It's an email that people have been sending questions, and I thank all those of you who have sent questions and concerns and some possible solutions to us. Again, we are trying to reach out and get as much input and feedback over the next 3 weeks, as we want to bring a plan to our school board that mitigates as many of the concerns and bring our kids back in as safe a manner as we possibly can come August 31st. Again, kind of covered some of these next steps about facilitators. Once the board does approve the plan, it is scheduled to be approved on July 27th. I will do my very best to have a preliminary plan, draft of the plan done by July 21st. Present that to our community. That will be either a Zoom or a live stream. We do have, I think, a cap of 1,000 on our executive Zoom accounts. So we'll see what the interest is for that, but we'll have the link available prior to that. And then on July 27th, our school board would need to vote on the plan, and that will also be a virtual meeting as well. So those will be our next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Cromwell. Chris, are you going to send people to the breakout sessions?
My transportation group, it's John Scully. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we were getting cut off that quick. I didn't thank you all for your input, so thank you.
John, you got cut off in the middle of a sentence. Good.
Same from my side, Dr. Scanlon. I want to thank all the parents that joined us. We had an awesome dialogue, but we got cut off at the end too. We went right up to the last minute. So thank you, and I'll be reaching out to coordinate our next meeting for July 7th.
Yeah, let's can we go through each group and just take a couple of minutes just to summarize some of the topics that key points in those groups. Can we start with John? Let's start with the transportation. John and Michelle and Justin were in there. What were some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, Jim, I'll take that. And we actually, we started with the little bit of confusion that we as administrators know started from the get-go, in that the whole plan was developed, or the social distancing guidelines are optimal at 6, but best at 3, and automatically we're starting a bus with children that are probably a foot to maybe a foot and a half apart. So we struggled with that, and we talked through that, and we understand that is guidance coming from the Department of Health of Chester County, and that's what we are going to develop the plan based on. We did get into mask discussions, but I won't elaborate on that since that's next week's. We had some discussion about the cohort, and that the cohort is actually starting at the bus stop, and how we need to get parents involved, that they need to understand that social distancing needs to start at the bus stop, and that there is no district personnel there to work with that. We did talk about the survey, Jim, that we are sending out hopefully this week, about asking parents about the opt-out. We struggled a little bit with that in the fact that we don't have a plan approved yet we're asking parents to possibly opt out of something that they don't know all the specifics of what they're opting out of. So we feel that parents need to err on the cautious side, and if they cannot commit to driving their students, then they should probably stay with providing transportation. I think that is about where we were with a lot of concerns with the social distancing and how we're going to load and unload buses, that we will stagger children going onto the bus and we will unload front to back when we get to the locations.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. How about pupil services? Leanne, were you?
Hi, Jim.
saying
Well,
that
we
one?
had a really lively discussion. It was probably one of the fastest hours I've ever had. A lot of discussion, really good thoughts from our parents, raising concerns. You know, safety is paramount, you know, and keeping our kids safe. And when we're talking about kids with disabilities, you know, the challenge of social distancing is really tough. And many of the students need to have like hand over hand instruction and in order to have their needs met, and how do we maintain safety for both the staff and the students in that situation. So we talked a lot about that and really got into how do we keep our kids safe and almost using some of the things that were talked about from the America's Pediatric Association, you know, harm versus the risk. And, you know, with that social isolation and the importance of having our kids in school and what can we do to best meet their needs, but still stay within what's reasonable as far as social distancing is concerned. So many of those types of things will have to be handled individually through IEP meetings, but some really good discussion tonight.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leanne. How about the high school group? Kevin, Alicia, Crystal, a couple others in there. Sarah.
Yeah, hey Jim, this is Kevin.
So how was the high school? I mean, I got a chance to drop into all of the groups. There was really a lot of good ideas coming out of that. So how about high school? What are some takeaways there, Kevin?
Yeah, first, thanks to our group for joining us tonight and taking the time to do that and talking pretty openly. Really appreciate everyone taking the time and sharing with us and asking your questions. I'll kind of go through these, Jim, the 3 questions that we had, and I won't share. There were a lot of ideas. We did take careful notes on these things. I'm looking at these notes right now, but I highlighted a few areas, and then the rest of this I'll share with the whole group in a document form. But first question had to do with potholes. So of course we focused on any time that kids are close to each other throughout the course of the day. And of course there are many of those opportunities, beginning with when kids first arrive at school and all the kids that go to the cafeteria before the school days even started. We've got a challenge on our hands of how to mitigate that distance between the kids. And I have a couple ideas for how we will do that at East. I'm sure each of the high schools has something they can do. Stairwells, we talked about whether we would have one directional stairwells and hallways in order to keep traffic flowing in particular directions. One of the parents on our call is a doctor and recommended we consider ventilation in our hallways and stairwells too, to keep the air flowing so that droplets in the air don't spread too easily from student to student. We talked about lunches and how we would kind of quickly serve the kids lunches and get them to the locations where they need to go, whether we would do a grab and go kind of thing, and what role Aramark would play in those in getting the kids lunches. So those were some of the highlights from the first question. But again, there were many more ideas I'll share with you in a Word document. Question B had to do with the challenges that are particular to the high school kids. And we really wanted to focus there on getting buy-in from the students, looking at how peers can positively influence peers. Poster campaigns, video campaigns, social media campaigns that are positive and reinforcing, and really staying away from, we would never do this, but scaring the kids or disciplining them for giving their friend a high five or a hug or anything like that, unless it was something malicious or intentional, which I don't think it would be. But the kids miss each other, and we have to keep that in mind. And we also need to keep in mind that this is temporary, and kids' mental and emotional health is important, and that the things that we're putting in place right now, hopefully we don't need them for too long. So really trying to keep the message positive and reinforcing with the students that we're doing this for everyone's best benefit. And then the last question had to do with how we can make this easier for the students, and there were recommendations about whatever information we can share with them now to help prepare them for what school is going to be like when we resume. We did share that we're going to use those first 4 days of school to stagger the alphabet so that we have fewer students in our building. We can do some training with them and some reminding with them, just trying to slow down those first few days before school begins full-time after Labor Day. Stress-free activities. You know, if we are going to kind of keep things moving in the hallways and between classes, how can we mitigate stress for the students in the hallways? Would we stagger class departure time? That's challenging with the bell schedule that we have. But I think those are the highlights from our group. So I could keep going, but I would take up all of our time going through all the great ideas that came up.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. How about the middle school group? I think, Joe, you were facilitating. We were in there. Sean, you were in there. Bob? Somebody
Yeah, I was actually, I was part of that group. I tried to capture as much as I could from that discussion. We had a lot of great ideas and different topics that were brought up. So just to highlight a few of them, one of them was the lockers, and I know, and especially in the middle school, so it's always a concern for students as is, so in particular during these times. So some possible ideas were, looking at staggering the locker times, how we assign lockers, do we have to do that a little bit differently? The flow of the students when they go to their lockers. Can we have certain students going to their lockers within different parts of the buildings at different times? Things like that. Can we limit the number of times that the students go to their lockers? Maybe AM materials and PM materials. So lots of good thoughts there. Class changes came up. Is there a way to minimize the number of transitions for the students within the hallways? They change. Obviously, we have 48-minute periods. They're changing frequently throughout the day. Is there a way to limit the number of times that the students have to change throughout the hallway? Someone mentioned block scheduling. Others asked if teachers could be the ones that change more frequently than the students, which obviously is a challenge, but something to look at. We looked at social distancing during arrival and dismissal. We talked about staggering, potentially staggering when students are dropped off. Could we do the same thing in the afternoon as far as when students are dismissed and they're picked up to limit that car line? We're going to have to look at the grouping areas that we have for the students, in the morning and in the afternoon. So avoid those large grouping areas, and how we can dismiss the students in smaller groups so that we don't have those large groups of students and we avoid any opportunities for students to congregate. Looking at the transition times in general between classes, how do we decrease that prairie dog effect is what somebody mentioned. So looking at the times and the flow. Also, I think a really important piece of takeaway that we had was just the education of the students. It came up quite a few times, and how that's going to be such a critical piece. We are, as Dr. Fagan mentioned, I know a couple others mentioned, staggering that first week is probably going to be critical in how we use that time with the students when they come in, and making sure that the students understand it's a new environment that they're coming in and that we're here to support them. But we need them to follow these new procedures that we have in place, and then be consistent about reinforcing that throughout the year. And it's not just a once and done. Couple more things, just the cafeteria, which we've been thinking about a lot, about staggering. We know we can only have up to probably 250 students at the max during the green phase. So looking at utilizing some of our other large areas to spread students out a little bit. Also trying to get creative with the way the students are buying their lunches, whether it's the box lunches or how you call students up to the lines. And that was pretty much everything. And just, just communicating and communicating with the parents and the students, and really educating the students. And with honesty, I think, as one parent put it, which was really nice and true, just being honest and make sure we emphasize that we are here. They're here because we care. and we have all these protocols in place to help them. So that was the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean.
Sure.
Okay, how about elementary? We have, I don't know if Donna or Dennis or Nora, Rebecca.
Sure, I can start up here, Jim. Thanks to all the parents. They had wonderful comments that will best be reflected in the document in detail. So we'll get that document out as soon as we possibly can. But to summarize an overarching theme, it's reasonable to expect the social distancing. However, the enforcement of the distancing is challenging because we're dealing with children. We want them to have fun. We don't want them to be afraid. We don't want them to feel like they've done something terribly wrong if they didn't social distance. But there was some solutions to that, which was don't underestimate our children. One of the parents gave a good example about her child being in a camp and how quickly they adapted to the changes.
Donna, you muted on accident. Yeah.
Okay, so did you start to hear the camp story?
Just started to hear that.
So one parent used the example of don't also underestimate our children because they do quickly adapt when we teach them well and we educate them to a changing world. So we want to preserve. So yes, it's reasonable to expect a 3 feet distance, hard to enforce. The solutions are to teach our children some of these new processes, hand washing, hand sanitizing, give them the visual cues they need to understand what the 3 feet apart is, give them the signs, communicate well. There were some other topics that were addressed, like the arrival and the buses, and how it is going to be challenging to enforce that social distancing, getting off the bus, getting on the bus, keeping the children at school, and how we're going to have to do some things differently. For example, maybe utilizing multiple access points, location doors, utilizing more staff. There was a gentleman from Penwood, I believe, who serves on Watchdogs or Fern Hill, maybe utilizing some parents to help with that. Possibly getting a bus aide, a medical professional, a doctor mentioned on the bus, like to take temperatures, because we can kind of sort that out before they get to school, and maybe even help with the social distancing on the bus. That was mentioned as a possible solution. Instructional time. Some of the people mentioned that, yes, that 3 feet can be challenging. It's most concerning when there's a lot of time spent breaching that 3 feet space. That's when we see most of the risk. So really to monitor the time, try not to breach 3 feet. Also, don't assume that you can't do 6 feet in different locations, because you might be able to, but really to monitor the time spent in those little mini groups in that limited space with limited ventilation. So lots of solutions to some of the problems that were mentioned that we can put in the document. I don't know if any of the other principals have any other things to add.
Yeah, that's a great summary, and these are all excellent ideas with some possible solutions. And there's some things in the chat about drop-offs. Can we use multiple areas? We actually started talking about that administratively instead of just having one parent drop off. If there's going to be a big crowd of people there, that we look at multiple ways to stage the drop-offs to try to help with traffic and flow into the school. So these are all really, really excellent ideas. What we will do now, our facilitators from the breakouts, they're gonna do a summary. We'll put the summaries together up on our website. This presentation and the summaries of the breakout sessions, we did record that tonight, so we will also make that available. So anybody that hasn't been able to participate in our subcommittees, we'll be able to go back and see the information. And we will continue to put all the data that we get, any new guidelines that we get up on our website, and communicate frequently as we get closer to the start of school with regard to what this is going to look like. So I thank everybody for your time tonight. I know it's getting a little bit late, but at this point I would just say to everyone, have a great 4th of July weekend. I don't know if there's going to be big picnics out there. If there are, you got to maintain 3 to 6 feet and be safe. So with that, thanks again for everybody's input, and we will send out the links next week. We'll start with a general meeting again, and I think what we'll do is we'll schedule smaller breakout groups. So we'll divide some of our facilitators into smaller breakout groups to get more dialogue, and schedule perhaps an hour and 15 or an hour and a half, as much time as we can for those breakouts for the topics for next week. If we have some questions that we can answer and follow up with the questions we heard tonight, we will start our meeting next week on July 7th with that, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms for each of the respective groups. So have a great 4th of July weekend, everybody. Thanks so much. I know that working together as a community, we are going to make the start of school year the best it can be for our kids and our staff and our community. So thanks again, and we'll keep on working.